In our last survey lecture we examined the events surrounding the parables Jesus taught the multitude and his disciples. In this survey lecture we will continue to cover the chronological events of his miracles and healings as he continues in his second year of public ministry. During this time Jesus displays the calming of the storm, and does a number of healings including the demon-possessed men, a woman with a flow of blood, several blind men, and resurrects a young girl. After the teaching of his many parables and declaring who was considered his real family, Jesus sends the multitude away and tells his disciples they will pass to the other side of the water. Entering a ship with his disciples, they sail off along with other smaller ships, in which Jesus falls asleep during their trip. As they sail there arises a storm in which the waves begin to beat and cover the ship with waves, filling it with water and placing them in jeopardy. The disciples go down to where Jesus is sleeping, and waking him in fear that they might die, ask if he cares that they will perish and plead for him to save them. Rising up, Jesus commands the wind and sea to be still, and there was a great calm after they ceased. Speaking to his disciples, he asks them why they are fearful, and refers to them as those with little faith. How is it that you have no faith? Marveling at him, the disciples greatly feared and asked one another what sort of man he was, that even the wind and sea obey him. Continuing on their sailing journey, they cross the water and come to the country of the Gadarenes, which is against Galilee. Once they exit the ship, they are confronted by two demon-possessed men, who were exceedingly fierce and prevented men from passing that way. The Gospels of Mark and Luke give us an account of the interaction Jesus has with one of these men, while Matthew's Gospel seems to give us an account of both men interacting with Jesus. We are told at least one of these men dwelled in the tombs and had been possessed of devils for a long time, wearing no clothes and not living in a house. No one was able to bind the possessed man, and even when chains were used, he apparently would break the chains and fetters, and no one was able to tame him. Being driven into the wilderness by the devil, he lived in the mountains where he would cry and cut himself with stones. Approaching Jesus, at least one of them ran up and fell down before him, worshipping him. They cry out to Jesus and ask, "What have we to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Have you come to torment us before the time?" One of them asking Jesus not to torment him before the time, as Jesus had told the spirit to come out of the man. Jesus asks the man what his name is, and the possessed man replies his name is Legion, for they are many, and asks Jesus not to send them out of the country or to the deep. Away off near the mountain, there was a herd of about 2,000 swine that was feeding, and the devils asked Jesus if they may enter the swine if Jesus casts them out. Jesus commands them to go, and they enter the swine, and the herd began to run violently into the water and died. Those who were herding the swine began to flee to the city and tell of what had happened, and when the people of that whole city came, they saw the possessed man sitting at Jesus' feet and clothed, being in his right mind. The people were afraid, and the witnesses told of what happened with the man and the swine, and they plead with Jesus to leave their coast. As Jesus goes up to the ship to leave, the healed man requests from Jesus that he may go with him. Jesus does not allow him to go with them, but tells him to go home, to show and tell his friends and those in the city what great things the Lord did for him and how he had compassion on him. The healed man goes off to Decapolis and proclaims the great things Jesus did for him, and all the men marveled. Leaving that region, Jesus and his disciples pass over the water again to the other side, where people waited for him and received him gladly. While he was there, we are told that one of the rulers of the synagogue, a man by the name of Jairus, comes to Jesus, falling at his feet and worshipping him. Jairus beseeches Jesus to come to his home because he had a 12-year-old daughter who was dying, and he desired that Jesus would lay his hands on his only daughter so that she would be healed and live. Rising up, Jesus and his disciples followed Jairus to his home while many people followed and thronged him. While Jesus and the disciples are walking, we are told of a woman who had been diseased with a flow of blood coming behind him. She had apparently been ailed with this disease for 12 years, and we are told that she not only had spent all she had on physicians and suffered, but she was also not healed, and she even got worse. Coming up behind Jesus, she touched the border of his garment, saying within herself that if she just touched his garment she would be healed. When she did this, the fountain of blood she had been diseased with dried up, and she felt that she was healed. Immediately Jesus knew that virtue had left him, and he asked who touched his clothes. The people around him denied it was them, but Peter and the disciples are surprised and tell Jesus that the people throng about him. What does he mean by asking who touched him? But Jesus replies that virtue has gone out of him. Jesus looked around and found the woman, and she realized that she could not hide. Fearing and trembling, she approaches Jesus and falls at his feet before the crowd, and confesses what she did and how she was healed immediately. Calling her daughter, Jesus tells her to be of good comfort, her faith has healed her, and tells her to go in peace. While this was happening, a messenger from Jairus' house comes and informs him that his daughter has died. There is no need to trouble the master any further. However, when Jesus heard this, he tells Jairus not to be afraid, but to believe and she will be healed. Arriving at the house, Jesus only allows Peter, James, John to follow. And as they arrive, the people are weeping and wailing. But Jesus asks them why they're making noise and crying, and tells them not to weep, that the girl is not dead but sleeping. Laughing and scorning at him, Jesus sends the people away and takes Jairus, the girl's mother, Peter, James, and John into the girl's room. Taking the girl by the hand, Jesus tells her to arise, and having her spirit come again, she rose up and began to walk. Being astonished, Jesus tells the parents not to tell anyone what was done, and to give the girl something to eat. But fame still spread about him. Later, departing from there, Jesus and his disciples are followed by 2 blind men who begin to cry that he would have mercy on them, referring to Jesus as the Son of David. Entering a house, the blind men follow, and Jesus asks them if they believe he can heal them, in which they reply, "Yes." Touching their eyes, Jesus proclaims to let it be according to their faith, at which time they were healed and their eyes opened. Afterwards, Jesus informs them not to tell anyone, but the 2 men leave and begin to spread fame about him for what he had done. Later, leaving the house, there is a demon-possessed man who was mute, brought to him. After Jesus had cast out the devil from the man began to speak, causing the multitude to marvel and proclaim that they had never seen anything like this in Israel. Yet the Pharisees accused him still of casting out devils by the prince of devils. Traveling about with his disciples, Jesus continued to go through all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the kingdom of God. As he continued, he also healed the sick and diseased, having compassion on the multitude of people because they fainted and were scattered as lost sheep without a shepherd to guide them. Turning to his disciples, he spoke to them and proclaimed that the harvest was plentiful, but the laborers were few, and that they should pray that the Lord of the harvest would send out laborers into his harvest. Returning to his own region of Nazareth with his disciples, he continues to teach, and when the Sabbath had come, he taught in their synagogue, and the people were astonished at his teachings, wondering where he had acquired his wisdom and his mighty works. Beginning to question his identity, they asked, "Is he not the carpenter's son and the son of Mary, and aren't his brothers James, Joses, Simon, Judas, and aren't his sisters with us?" The people began to be offended at Jesus, and he proclaims to the people that a prophet is not without honor except in his own country, in his own house, among his own kin. And because of their unbelief he did not do many works there, only laying his hands on and healing a few sick people. Jesus marveled at their unbelief, and he moved along continuing to teach about the villages. And with these continued teachings in the villages, we will end this brief lecture over the ministry of Jesus and his apostles. In review, Jesus calmed the storm, healed the demon-possessed men, raised the girl from the dead, healed the woman with the flow of blood, gave sight to the blind men, and continued to teach in Nazareth. In our next survey overview, we will examine the chronological events of Jesus sending out his 12 apostles, the death of John the Baptist, the healing of a lame man, and the proclamation of Jesus' authority.